Look at your dog sleeping comfortably on the couch. That loyal companion is not a product of human mastery. That dog is the living result of prehistoric male desperation. Today, we romanticize the bond between a man and his dog. You think of it as a symbol of leadership, a pure connection between the human master and the tamed beast. You buy expensive dog food, take them on walks, and treat them like family. We tell ourselves that ancient humans were brilliant conquerors who looked at a vicious, bloodthirsty wolf and bravely decided to tame it. But evolutionary biology tells a completely different, much darker story. The domestication of the wild wolf was not an act of alpha dominance. It was an accident born from the exact same psychological weakness that puts modern men in the friend zone today. To understand how the most dangerous predator on the savannah became man's best friend, we have to travel back 2.1 million years and look at the miserable life of the prehistoric nice guy. Rewind to a time when the world was entirely ruled by teeth and claws. Humans were not the apex predators of the African savanna. We were slow, fragile, and practically blind in the dark. As we explored in previous chapters of our evolutionary history, survival for the early human female required a ruthless biological contract. Because human babies were born completely helpless, the prehistoric woman needed someone to bleed, sweat, and labor for her calories. She needed a dedicated provider to bring her meat and guard her fire. But she did not extract this daily survival tax from the dominant, genetically superior alpha males. The alphas operated completely outside the rules, taking what they wanted through pure, unbothered physical intimidation. The men who were forced to pay the grueling alimony of the prehistoric world were exclusively the beta males. The beta male was the ultimate evolutionary worker ant. His entire existence was defined by his utility. He believed that if he just worked hard enough, if he brought back enough meat, and if he provided enough safety, he would secure his genetic future. His nervous system was permanently wired for provision and protection. Every single day he faced the terrifying reality of the wild just to bring resources back to a woman who was biologically hardwired to secretly crave the alpha. The beta male was trapped in a state of chronic stress, desperate to please, desperate to prove his worth, and completely terrified of being abandoned by the tribe. This created a very specific, highly vulnerable psychological profile. The beta male developed an overwhelming, almost pathological sense of empathy and duty. And it was this exact emotional vulnerability that the prehistoric wolves would eventually exploit. But why would an ancient human ever interact with a wolf in the first place? You have to understand that 2.1 million years ago, wolves and humans were direct competitors. We hunted the same prey. We occupied the same territories. We were locked in a brutal daily war for calories. A wild prehistoric wolf was a massive, highly intelligent killing machine that operated in highly coordinated packs. They were the mafia of the savannah. If a wolf pack caught an isolated human, that human was dead in seconds. The idea of walking up to one of these terrifying creatures and offering it food goes against every single rational survival instinct in the human brain. So how did the bridge between these two warring species ever get built? The answer lies in the stark behavioral difference between the alpha and the beta male. Imagine a massive, dominant prehistoric alpha male encountering a starving wolf pup whining near the edge of the camp. The alpha male's biological software is built purely on strength, environmental control, and ruthless efficiency. He looks at the weak, freezing animal, and his nervous system registers absolutely nothing. He feels no pity. He feels no maternal or paternal instinct to protect a creature that cannot provide value to him. If the pup is a threat, he kills it. If the pup is just annoying, he kicks it into the darkness and goes back to sleep. The alpha male does not pay the survival tax for human women, and he certainly is not going to pay a caloric tax to feed a random wild animal. His emotional stoicism makes him completely immune to the pup's distress signals. He is a king, and kings do not serve beggars. But now, put the prehistoric beta male in that exact same situation. The beta male is returning from a grueling, dangerous hunt. He is exhausted, carrying a piece of scavenged meat that he bled to get. He knows he has to give this meat to the woman at the fire just to maintain his fragile mating contract. But on his way back, he hears the high-pitched, desperate whine of an abandoned wolf pup hidden in the brush. When the beta male hears that sound, something deeply counterintuitive and dangerous happens in his brain. A biological glitch misfires in his nervous system. Because the beta male has been genetically conditioned over thousands of generations to be a hypervigilant provider, his brain is highly sensitive to the distress signals of dependence. He is hardwired to care for the helpless. His entire mating strategy relies on being the nice guy who sacrifices his own resources to keep others alive. When he hears the crying wolf pup, his brain mistakenly processes it with the same empathetic circuitry that he uses for human infants. He feels a sudden, overwhelming urge to protect it. He looks at the terrifying little predator, and instead of seeing a future threat to his life, he sees something that finally needs him. This is the exact same psychological trap that modern men fall into every single day. Think about why the nice guy gets constantly used in modern dating. You meet a woman who is emotionally chaotic, carrying massive baggage from toxic relationships with dominant men. Instead of walking away like a high-value alpha, your beta programming activates. You feel this intense, overwhelming urge to fix her. You want to save her. You want to pay her bills, listen to her problems for hours, and provide a safe harbor. You believe that by rescuing her and providing resources, she will eventually reward you with genuine desire and loyalty. You are projecting your own need for validation onto her distress. The prehistoric beta male was running this exact same tragic software, but he was projecting it onto a wild, bloodthirsty animal. The beta male slowly approaches the shivering wolf pup. He knows that giving away his hard-earned meat is a massive risk. If he returns to the camp empty-handed, the prehistoric woman will be furious. She might test his frame, publicly humiliate him, or threaten to banish him to the edges of the fire. But the beta's desperate need to be a savior overrides his logical fear. He reaches into his pouch, tears off a piece of raw meat, and tosses it into the dirt in front of the wild animal. The pup cautiously sniffs the meat, eats it, and looks back at the man. In that exact second, the history of the world is permanently altered. The beta male feels a massive rush of dopamine. For the first time in his miserable, stressful existence, he has provided for a creature that does not judge him. The wolf pup does not run secret fitness tests on him. The wolf pup does not covertly seek out the alpha male behind his back. The wolf pup simply accepts the meat and looks at him with pure, unadulterated dependence. The beta male has finally found a transaction where his survival tax buys him actual, uncomplicated loyalty. But he has no idea that he has just initiated a biological contract that is vastly more dangerous than the one he signed with the human female. Because wolves are not just mindless eating machines. They are highly sophisticated pack animals with a strict, brutal social hierarchy. When the beta male fed that first wolf, he was not just taming a pet. He was accidentally inserting himself into the complex, violent political system of a wild predator species. And the wolves were about to use his psychological weakness to completely infiltrate the human camp. To comprehend the magnitude of this evolutionary mistake, we must analyze the brain of the prehistoric wolf. Wolves are incredibly socially intelligent. In the wild, their survival depends on reading the body language, intentions, and weaknesses of every other member of their pack. They have specialized neural networks dedicated to understanding hierarchy, dominance, and submission. When that starving wolf pup grew up, it did not just forget the man who fed it. It hung around the edges of the human camp, staying just out of the light of the fire, watching the beta males work. The wolves observed the human tribe with the cold, calculating eyes of a natural predator. They watched the humans hunt. They watched them gather around the fire. But most importantly, the wolves watched the social dynamics between the men and the women. They saw how the massive alpha males sat comfortably, demanding space and projecting absolute dominance. The wolves instinctively understood the alpha humans. In a wolf pack, the alpha wolf behaves exactly the same way. He eats first, moves with unbothered confidence, and ignores the desperate pleas of the lower-ranking members. The wolves knew better than to approach the human alphas. They recognized them as apex rivals and gave them a wide, respectful berth. But when the wolves looked at the beta males, they saw something completely different. They saw an anxious, exhausted creature that was constantly trying to appease others. They smelled the cortisol and the fear pheromones pouring off the beta males as they stood guard in the dark. The wolves, masters of reading submission, immediately identified the beta males as the weak link in the human hierarchy. The wolves realized that these lower status men were biologically programmed to give away their resources if they were approached with the right submissive body language. The wolves essentially cracked the code of the beta male's psychology. They realized that if they lowered their heads, tucked their tails, and whimpered, mimicking the distress signals of a helpless dependent, the beta male's empathetic glitch would activate. The beta male would literally hand over his hard-earned meat rather than face the emotional discomfort of ignoring a plea for help. The wolves had discovered the ultimate evolutionary hack. Why risk dying in a brutal fight with a wild deer when you can just manipulate a stressed-out human nice guy into doing the hunting for you? This was the beginning of the most successful parasitic relationship in mammalian history. The wolves were not being tamed. They were actively domesticating the beta males. They were training the lower status humans to become their personal biological ATMs, extracting calories through emotional manipulation. And the beta males, desperate for any form of validation and companionship that did not involve the brutal rejection of human females, fell for it completely. They began intentionally leaving scraps of food at the edge of the camp. They started looking forward to the quiet moments in the dark when the wolves would approach. The beta male finally felt like he was a king in his own small world. He could not command the respect of the women, and he could not challenge the alphas, but he could command the loyalty of these wild beasts simply by paying them a food tax. He was buying affection. He thought he was building an army, but the reality was far more humiliating. The beta male was just transferring his alimony contract from the prehistoric woman to a wild animal. He was working twice as hard, bleeding twice as much on the savanna, just to feed two different species that were both using him for his resources. And as the wolves grew larger, stronger, and more integrated into the camp's ecosystem, a terrifying new dynamic began to emerge. The wolves were no longer just begging for scraps. They were beginning to understand the human hierarchy so well that they started to physically enforce it. The wolves were about to realize that the beta male's desperate need for a friend could be weaponized against the very tribe that treated him like a disposable slave. The prehistoric wolves did not just stay at the edge of the camp waiting for random scraps of meat. They were highly sophisticated pack hunters, and they quickly realized that hunting the beta male's psychology was vastly more efficient than hunting wild prey. To do this, they began to systematically hack the human nervous system. They evolved a specific set of behaviors designed exclusively to exploit the beta male's desperate need for connection. In the wild, sustained eye contact between two predators is an absolute declaration of war. A wild wolf staring directly into the eyes of another animal is a challenge to the death. But the wolves that lingered around the human camp began to do something entirely unnatural. They began to look at the beta males with soft, pleading eyes. Over thousands of generations, these animals would actually evolve a specialized facial muscle, the levator anguli oculi medialis, which allowed them to raise their inner eyebrows. This created what we now call puppy dog eyes. They did not evolve this muscle to communicate with other wolves. They evolved it specifically to mimic the facial expressions of human infants. When a prehistoric beta male looked into those sad, manipulative eyes, his brain had absolutely no defense. His visual cortex processed the image of a helpless dependent, and his pituitary gland responded by releasing a massive surge of oxytocin. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone. It is the exact same chemical that floods a mother's brain when she nurses her child. The beta male was being chemically hijacked by a wild animal, deprived of genuine affection from the prehistoric women who were secretly executing the dual mating strategy with the dominant alphas. The beta male became biologically addicted to the wolf. He was completely starved for validation. The prehistoric woman only gave him attention when he successfully paid the survival tax. But the wolf gave him the illusion of unconditional love just for throwing a piece of meat on the ground. This transaction of calories for validation was the definition of a parasitic relationship masked as a friendship. The beta male was literally starving his own body, giving the highest quality, most nutrient-dense cuts of meat to a predator, receiving absolutely zero survival value in return. The wolf was simply running a biological algorithm to extract calories with minimal effort. The wolf did not respect the beta male. The wolf had just successfully trained the beta male to be its servant. This exact same psychological vulnerability is completely ruining the lives of millions of modern men today. When a modern man is ignored by women, pushed to the bottom of the social hierarchy, and completely stripped of his masculine dominance, he almost always retreats into the affection of a pet. You see men today treating their dogs like human children. They spend thousands of dollars on premium food, custom beds, and vet bills, while their own romantic and social lives completely disintegrate in front of them. They believe they are experiencing a profound connection, but they are simply paying a massive, modern survival tax to an animal because the human dating market has rejected them. You think you are a pack leader because your dog obeys your commands when you hold a treat, but true dominance cannot be bought with a piece of food. It must be commanded through unshakable environmental control. This same leadership instinct that the first men carried in their blood is detailed in the ancestral alpha male manual. Link in the description. By understanding these ancient triggers, you can stop projecting your need for validation onto pets and reclaim your dominant posture in the human world. Because while the beta male was busy falling in love with his new parasitic friend, the rest of the prehistoric tribe was watching this dynamic unfold with absolute horror and disgust. Think about how the prehistoric woman reacted to this new alliance. Her entire biological reality was built on the alimony contract. She needed the beta male to bleed and sweat to provide calories for her and her offspring. When she looked into the shadows and saw her designated provider throwing hard-earned meat to a wild, dangerous beast, her evolutionary alarm bells went off violently. To the prehistoric woman, the wolf was not a cute pet. The wolf was a four-legged rival stealing her resources. The beta male was openly breaching the survival contract. He was taking the energy that was supposed to guarantee her genetic future and wasting it on a predator that provided absolutely nothing to the tribe. This triggered an intense wave of female psychological warfare. The women of the tribe began to aggressively test the beta males who fed the wolves. They used the ultimate weapon of the ancient savanna, reputation destruction. They gossiped, they shamed, and they threatened to completely banish the beta males from the warmth of the fire. They tried to assert their dominance over his resources by publicly humiliating him for associating with the beasts. They demanded that he stop feeding the animals immediately or face total social execution. But for the first time in human history, the beta male hesitated. The threat of female rejection was terrifying, but the oxytocin bond with the wolf was incredibly strong. The beta male was torn between the brutal, demanding contract of the human female and the easy purchased loyalty of the wild dog. And how did the alpha male react to all of this? He watched from the warmest center of the camp with absolute, unbothered indifference. To the dominant alpha, a wolf was nothing more than another piece of meat walking around the savannah. If a wolf crossed the line and came too close to his sleeping spot, the alpha would grab his heavy wooden spear and kill it without a second thought. The alpha male did not need a pet because his nervous system was already anchored in pure physical superiority. When the alpha looked at the beta male feeding the wolf, he saw exactly what the wolves saw. He saw a weak, anxious man desperately buying affection because he lacked the raw genetic power to command respect naturally. The alpha felt no empathy for the beta, and he felt no connection to the wolf. He simply went back to sleep, completely confident in his own ability to crush any threat that approached him. But evolution is entirely driven by unintended consequences. The alpha male's indifference was a massive miscalculation. Because as the generations passed, the wolves that stayed near the camp began to change. They were getting fatter, stronger, and more deeply integrated into the beta male's daily routine. They stopped hiding in the absolute pitch-black darkness and started sleeping just a few feet away from the beta male's fire. The wolves were no longer just beggars extracting a caloric tax. They were beginning to understand that their own survival was now entirely dependent on the survival of the beta male. In the brutal logic of the wild, you protect your primary food source with your life. The wolves realized that if the beta male died, the free meat would stop forever. This realization triggered a terrifying shift in the dynamics of the savannah. One cold night, a massive saber-toothed cat approached the edge of the camp, hunting for a sleeping human. Normally, the wolves would scatter instantly to save themselves. But this time, they did something that defied millions of years of predatory logic. They stood their ground. They stepped in front of the terrified beta male, bared their teeth, and unleashed a coordinated, vicious attack on the invading monster. The wolves defended the human. In that exact moment, the beta male's reality completely shattered. He looked at the snarling pack of wolves standing between him and certain death, and a dangerous new thought entered his primitive brain. He realized he was no longer just the disposable, bullied sentinel of the tribe. He might not have the massive physical strength of the alpha male, and he might be biologically despised by the women, but he had just accidentally acquired a mercenary army. He now commanded the jaws and claws of an apex predator pack, and this terrifying new technology was about to violently disrupt the hierarchy of the entire human species. The prehistoric savannah had never witnessed anything like this. For millions of years, the biological law of the jungle was incredibly simple, and it was absolutely brutal. The biggest, strongest primate always wins. The alpha male ruled the human camp through pure muscular density, physical intimidation, and a completely unbothered nervous system. But the anxious, exhausted beta male had just stumbled upon a terrifying loophole in the laws of nature. He no longer needed to be physically strong. He had successfully outsourced his violence to an apex predator. Picture the morning after the wolf pack defended the beta male from the saber-toothed cat. The psychological dynamic of the entire tribe is permanently fractured. The beta male walks toward the center of the camp, carrying his scavenged meat. But he is no longer walking alone. He is flanked by massive, snarling wild wolves that move exactly when he moves and stop exactly when he stops. The alpha male, accustomed to taking whatever he wants without consequence, stands up. The alpha approaches the beta male to assert his usual dominance, perhaps intending to steal the meat or push the beta back to the cold edge of the fire. The alpha expects the beta male to immediately cower, flood with cortisol, and drop his eyes in submission. But before the alpha can even raise his heavy wooden spear, the wolves react. They step directly between the beta male and the massive alpha. They bare their teeth, flatten their ears, and emit a low, vibrating growl that signals imminent, coordinated death. In that exact split second, the alpha male's primitive brain processes a terrifying mathematical reality. He is a genetic specimen, yes. He is physically superior to the beta male in every single way. But he cannot fight a pack of adult prehistoric wolves at the same time. If he strikes the beta male, the wolves will tear his throat out before his spear hits the ground. For the first time in the history of human evolution, the alpha male is forced to back down. The physical environment of the camp is no longer controlled by the man with the highest testosterone and the broadest shoulders. It is now completely controlled by the man who commands the beasts. The alpha's biological leverage instantly collapses. He is no longer the undisputed king of the savannah. He is just a large, isolated man without an army, and the beta male realizes that he holds the ultimate monopoly on security. This power shift triggered a massive economic boom for the beta male. The wolves did not just act as his bodyguards, they became his highly efficient hunting partners. A single beta male, communicating with a pack of wolves, could track down, exhaust, and kill massive game that the alpha male could never hunt by himself. The wolves had the speed and the scent tracking, while the beta male had the sharp wooden spears and the strategic planning. Together, they were the deadliest hunting coalition the planet had ever seen. Suddenly, the beta male was bringing back unbelievable amounts of calories. The crushing alimony contract of the prehistoric world was flipped entirely on its head. He was no longer begging for validation with small pathetic scraps of scavenged meat. He was providing absolute abundance. He controlled the food supply, and he controlled the lethal force of the camp. The prehistoric women watched this violent power shift unfold, and their biological software underwent a rapid, ruthless recalculation. You must remember that female biology is deeply pragmatic. Her primary evolutionary directive is the absolute survival of herself and her offspring. Previously, her dual mating strategy dictated that she extract daily resources from the beta male while secretly sneaking into the dark to secure the dominant genetics of the alpha male. But suddenly, the alpha male was obsolete. The alpha could no longer protect her from the beta male's wolves. The alpha could not provide the massive amounts of meat that the wolf hunting coalition was bringing in. The prehistoric woman realized that if she sneaked out into the dark to mate with the alpha, the beta male's wolves would track her scent immediately. She could no longer cheat the system. Her nervous system had to adapt. Her attraction triggers, originally wired to respond exclusively to raw physical size and unshakable stoicism, began to recognize an entirely new form of dominance, social and environmental control via proxy. She started to look at the beta male differently. She did not suddenly respect his anxious, empathetic nature, nor did she actually desire his genetic weakness. She respected the terrifying fangs standing next to him. She realized that to guarantee her survival in this new world, she had to fully align herself with the wolf master. The covert trips into the dark stopped. The women began to stay close to the beta male's fire. They offered him genuine compliance, not because he was naturally dominant, but because his external assets made him the safest bet on the savannah. The beta male had finally forced his way to the top of the reproductive hierarchy. He had bought his way into power. This ancient dynamic is the exact biological blueprint for how modern men approach power, wealth, and status today. When you grind for years to become a wealthy CEO, or when you buy a ridiculously expensive sports car, you are running the exact same software as the ancient beta male taming the wolves. You believe that acquiring external outsourced power will finally buy you the genuine biological attraction you were denied. You think that by demonstrating your financial resources and your modern wolf pack, the women who ignored you will suddenly desire you. And just like the prehistoric women, modern women will absolutely adapt to your new status. They will align themselves with your resources. They will offer you compliance and proximity. But there is a massive, crushing difference between negotiated survival compliance and raw primal attraction. You cannot buy the physiological response of a woman's nervous system. You can force her to stay by your fire because you own the wolves, but her DNA will always know that you are just a beta male hiding behind external leverage. The prehistoric beta male, however, was completely oblivious to this nuance. He felt like a god. He was finally sleeping in the warmest center of the camp. The women were staying by his side, cooking the massive amounts of meat his wolves brought in. The once dominant alpha males were marginalized, pushed to the cold edges of the fire, completely stripped of their leverage. The beta male believed he had finally won the ultimate evolutionary game. He thought he had completely hacked the harsh laws of biology and secured true, unshakable loyalty. But biology never gives you something for nothing. The universe always extracts a toll. The beta male was so blinded by his new power, so relieved to be free from the daily terror of the survival tax, that he completely failed to notice what the wolves were actually doing to his brain. He did not realize that the wolves had not just infiltrated his camp, they had infiltrated his genetic code. In exchange for their teeth, the wolves were permanently rewriting human DNA. And the terrifying biological price they were about to extract from the beta male would doom millions of modern men to a life of chronic anxiety, validation seeking, and quiet desperation. The wolves were about to invent the modern nice guy. The prehistoric beta male thought he had finally outsmarted the brutal laws of nature. By outsourcing his violence and hunting to the wolves, he secured his place at the center of the camp. He forced the women to stay by his fire, and he marginalized the massive alpha males. He reproduced. He passed his genes on to the next generation. But this evolutionary victory came with a devastating biological curse. Because when the beta male passed on his DNA, he did not just pass on his physical traits. He passed on the exact psychological glitches that made him connect with the wolves in the first place. He passed on the chronic anxiety. He passed on the hyper-empathy. And most dangerously, he passed on the desperate burning need for external validation. By successfully reproducing, the beta male permanently injected the nice guy software into the human gene pool. Over hundreds of thousands of years, this anxious provider-centric programming became the default operating system for millions of men. The beta male won the evolutionary game, but he completely lost the biological war of genuine attraction. Think about the brutal reality of what actually happened. The beta male did not domesticate the wolf. The wolf domesticated the beta male. The wild predators successfully trained the human to be their permanent provider. And the prehistoric woman? She accepted the massive amounts of meat the beta male brought back. She stayed by his fire for safety. But her nervous system never evolved to actually desire him. The dual mating strategy never died. It just went dormant. The woman's primal biology was still hardwired to crave the unbothered raw dominance of the original alpha male. She was simply trading her compliance for the beta male's external resources. The beta male was still paying the survival tax. He was just paying it to a much larger, much more expensive prehistoric household. He was feeding the wolves, feeding the women, and working himself to death while completely starving for genuine, uncalculated love. Fast forward 2.1 million years, and you can see this exact same tragedy playing out in the modern dating market every single day. You are the direct genetic descendant of the man who bought his power. When you take a modern woman to an expensive restaurant, when you buy her gifts, and when you constantly suppress your own needs just to keep her happy, you're running the exact same ancient software. You are throwing a piece of meat to the wolf. You are desperately hoping that your resources and your submissive kindness will finally buy you the loyalty and genuine attraction you crave. But deep down, in the darkest corners of your primitive brain, you know the terrifying truth. You know that you are just renting her affection. You know that if your resources disappear, if your modern wolves suddenly die, her compliance will instantly vanish. You are trapped in a constant state of performance anxiety because your power is entirely external. You are living as a modern beta male, terrified that one day she will look past your bank account and realize that you lack the internal stoic dominance of a true king. The modern world is designed to keep you in this exact position. Society actively encourages you to be the nice guy. It tells you that being an endless provider is the ultimate form of masculinity. The corporate system wants you to be the hyper-vigilant worker ant. The dating market expects you to pay the modern survival tax without asking for anything in return. Society loves the beta male because the beta male is incredibly useful. He builds the roads, pays the taxes, and feeds the dogs. But usefulness does not trigger biological respect. Utility does not create primal attraction. If you want to escape the friend zone, if you want to stop being used for your resources, you have to completely break the prehistoric contract. You must realize that the original alpha male genetics were never completely erased. You carry both the anxious beta and the stoic alpha in your DNA right now. The alpha is just buried under thousands of generations of social conditioning. To survive the modern world, you have to manually shut down the nice guy glitch. You have to stop buying affection. You have to stop trying to prove your worth through endless provision and emotional servitude. You must adopt the absolute, unbothered stillness of the men who slept peacefully in the center of the first fires. The alpha male did not need a pack of wolves to command respect, and you do not need external leverage to command yours. When a modern woman tests you, you do not try to appease her with resources. When the world demands your energy, you do not give it away out of fear. You hold your ground. The moment you stop relying on your external assets and start projecting internal, unshakable dominance, the female nervous system instantly recognizes you. Her biological radar bypasses the modern illusion. She stops seeing the anxious provider, and she finally sees the king. You don't need to feed the wolves anymore. It is time to become the monster in the dark. Ancestral Alpha Male Manual is in the link in the description. Click now and discover the instinct that every man carries, but few know how to use to regain your leadership posture, self-confidence, and respect.